Hi, and welcome to A Better HVAC podcast. My name is Ben Reed, and we are going to go on a journey through the chaotic and troubled world of residential HVAC through conversations with industry experts, frontline workers, policymakers, and entrepreneurs. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is Paulus, and you're going to hear me murder his last name in just a few minutes here. We're going to talk about open source and whether or not it can be applied to residential HVAC, and how one of the biggest open source projects in the world has really been making a difference for a lot of consumers that have been wanting control over their smart home systems. So come with us on a journey, and I think you'll enjoy what we have to talk about here. Paulus, so with me today is Paulus Schoutsen.
Yeah, will do.
Okay. So I would like you to actually pronounce your first and last name appropriately, just so the audience knows.
Paulus Schoutsen is the correct pronunciation, but here in the Americas, that doesn't really fly.
And where are you from, Paulus?
So I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I've been in the States now for 10 years, 11 years even.
And what made you come over?
Yeah, we had a bar where I was studying in the Netherlands. And so anyone that was writing their thesis, that was like doing theoretical research, staying like close to the bar would end up just drinking because they had to schedule their own time. And I realized that I would probably be also, that fate would also be on me. So I would also be just drinking all the time and not writing my thesis. So I decided to find a place to write my thesis outside of the university, became San Diego, and then I stuck around, and that's that.
All right. And what was your thesis on?
So I studied business information technology. So it was like around data, and the university had a project with the federal government, and we were doing Medicaid, Medicare fraud detection for the federal government.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then you have now stumbled into home automation.
Yeah.
And you have a project called Home Assistant.
Yeah, the small one.
just a tiny little hobby project.
Yeah.
At least it started that way. But if you could define Home Assistant for somebody who's never heard of it, maybe somebody who's like a tradesperson, how would you explain Home Assistant?
Well, Home Assistant is the brains of a smart home. It's a home automation platform, and it focuses on local control and privacy. But what is smart home, right? What is a smart home? And it's really like you have different devices in your house, and at a central place, and control these devices. And if you think of its simplicity, your electricity in your house is in a way a smart system where you have your brains, your breaker box, and if you use too much power, it short circuits, you like cut out the breaker. Now that's very simple control, right? We just cut off the power. But this is in a way a smart system. Obviously your thermostat controls like your heating. It's an even smarter system because it says turn on, it's too cold, turn off, it's too warm, and these kind of things. And Home Assistant actually does all of these kind of features, like not per se breaker box, but we integrate all these different devices that expose different types of controls, that give us different types of information, and bring it all into a central hub. And then from the central hub, it's really up to the user what they want to do with it, right? You can use it for security, you can use it to monitor plants and grow stuff, you can use it for controlling your climate in your house. Is it too warm, too cold? For example, maybe you want a warning when you keep a door open and the AC is on, for example, or a garage door left open, you want a warning for this, or you're arriving home, you want the garage door to open, or because we're tied to the home, we're really also in a way tied to the household. For example, we have calendaring and to-do things inside Home Assistant. And for example, in my case, I have a calendar with when my trash has to be put outside, and I get a push notification from Home Assistant, put the trash outside the night before the trash has to be outside. And so that's always done. There's other things you can, be reminded when you're at the grocery store with your shopping list so that you can, you need to buy something, like stuff like that. It is a very broad spectrum, but in the end, it all boils down to we want to get information from things, devices, or services that are in and around your house, and then we want to be able to control it. So turn on the light, turn off the light, open garage door, etc.
Yeah, and even some of the examples that you use, I guess you were a little bit humble in the way that you kind of laid out the capabilities, because it really is capable of almost everything. Like I've been using it for about 6-7 years now. I've built dozens of my own sensor and actuation devices where anytime you see one of those really compelling news articles of this new smart home gadget or this thing that somebody cooked up, oftentimes it's actually quite simple to do with Home Assistant. That's really what blew my mind about it, is that it's the easy button for any advanced thing you want to do in your house for automation. It'll make it just so ridiculously simple to do it in a very short amount of time.
It's very true. I think if you look at, let's take a thermostat, for example, right? Like we all think a thermostat is very complicated, but it really boils down to a temperature sensor and an on-off button for make it warmer, right? And then it's too warm, it just turns the button off. And it gets too cold, you turn the button on. And sure, there's like some smoothness, easing in and around it, but like most things that are very convenient to us they don't need super advanced systems, right? It actually boils down to turning something on and off.
And I listened to a podcast episode of you recently on a podcast called FOSSPod, where that one has a lot of great background about the project, about your work on it. So I'm trying not to, I guess, overlap much with what they had asked you. But one thing you said on there I thought was funny, which is that you kind of accidentally made this project, because it's not a small project anymore. And I don't think you were planning on kind of building something like this.
Yeah, that's right. So just for background, like on the size, right now we're one of the 5 biggest smart home platforms in the world. So you have Apple, Amazon, Google, Samsung, and then there's Home Assistant, right? And this is, for example, The Verge, which is a big technology website in the United States, or I guess worldwide, but they're mainly focused on the United States. They listed us as such in like their 5 during the Smart Home Week that they did like earlier this year. But yeah, I wasn't planning on building this, and I think that's like probably why it is so great, because just to be a little humble there. No, I set it up I was just playing with it. Like I got the Philips Hue lights. I was just writing some code for my own use case, and I want this, and then I want this, the lights to turn on when the sun is setting, and then I need the presence detection because it needs to also know that it doesn't turn on the light when I'm not at home, and then all of a sudden I was like, let's put it on GitHub because I'm a programmer, right? And that's your resume in a way. So let's put it on GitHub, and then other people started using it, and yeah, here we are. Like it's been 10 years now. We just recently had our 10-year birthday, and now we're the second most active open source project in the world.
That's huge. Like what, 200,000 users and 200,000 installations?
No, so that's actually that. If you look at our analytics, I think it's 200 something thousand, but our analytics are opt-in. So we estimate around 3.5 times more instances are out there. So we generally use like 800,000 installations worldwide.
That's super cool. And that explosion of growth, was some of this just kind of chance and luck, or was it that there was something special about the way that Home Assistant was born and that it grew? Because there was competitors. Habitat, I think, was another project.
Habitat is a commercial competitor in a way, right? So OpenHab would be the
OpenHab, right?
an open source alternative. I think it has two different parts of it. One of it was just timing. I think the timing was right. I think smart home used to be something really limited to homeowners, people that invested in their property and invested in making the place where they live better. And of course, that limits to the amount of people that have access like to a home is like a sub-filter of all the possible users in the world. But what started happening is that chips started to get cheaper, the supply chain got more global, more stuff got produced in China. One of the chips that I think really revolutionized it was the E8266 chip from Espresso, just because all of a sudden we had a $3.50 chip that adds Wi-Fi to a product, right? And all of a sudden everything became smart, and the prices of smart products started dropping really fast, and everything like light bulbs, dishwashers, everything is smart now. And so that was really in that, we're still in those glory days, right, in a way. But Home Assistant was there when those chips came around, and it really made home automation accessible to everyone. And I think the same with Philips Hue, I mentioned it earlier, is what like got me started on Home Assistant. Philips Hue doesn't require you to break open your walls. You don't swap out light switches, you swap out light bulbs. Well, as a renter, you generally own your light bulbs, right? So this is a thing that now everyone can have a smart home. The other side, I think, this is one side where I think we've been successful. The other side has been because we've been focusing very early on, like you need to run an open source project like you run a company. So basically people pay $0 for it, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't, they're users and they need to see the value that they can get from Home Assistant. And so we've always focused on how easy is it to install Home Assistant, right? So we built a whole operating system And when you launch Home Assistant, it automatically discovers everything in your house and click all those devices in your dashboard. And it will even find stuff that you've never thought that you could integrate. So, for example, Home Assistant will detect your printer. And all of a sudden, you have the ink levels of your printer in Home Assistant. And this gives people, like, when they open Home Assistant and they see that all their media players, their existing light bulbs, all that stuff is there. And then even their printer, and they're like, whoa, this stuff is powerful. I can do a lot. And that just clicks. And then you're going to stick around. Because if you see an empty dashboard and then you're like, what do I now? Where do I click? What is the setup? Like, how does any of this work? You're going to be frustrated. And if you didn't pay any money for a product, a little bit frustration is enough to just move on. You're like, I'll just do something else with my time, right? If you spend $100, you're going to invest more time because, wow, that's a lot of money that you just spent on something. So showing value early on and making it very easy to see the value of the product has been just a focus from the beginning. And I think that's been part of our success.
Awesome. There's a whole bunch of questions related to that I want to get into. But first off, I think some of my listeners do not understand what open source really means. So if you could, basically a non-technical audience, somebody who has no idea on how to even use a computer, what does open source mean?
So open source means that the source is open, but it also means that we accept contributions. So if you think of Windows, right? Like you buy a Windows computer, Windows is made by Microsoft. It means that any change to Windows has to be done by Microsoft, and it has to be written by Microsoft employees. Now, with open source, we take a different approach. The source code is fully open. It doesn't mean that anyone can just write code and put it in Home Assistant, but anyone can write code. And when they make a change they can write a change to Home Assistant and then propose it to me or one of the other core developers and say, I made this change to Home Assistant. Do you want to accept it? And if I accept it, it becomes part of Home Assistant and it goes to all the people that use Home Assistant. And what does this mean? It means that a lot of people can help out because now anyone with a computer can help work on Home Assistant. It means that anyone with a computer that runs Home Assistant at home and finds a bug can fix that bug. And because they have the devices, they can actually reproduce it, submit the log, submit a fix, and software is great. Like one person writes it, everybody can benefit. And the devices in our houses, of course, there are standards, but it's a mess, right? There's so many vendors that build products. Even standards don't always help, right? Like we see with Zigbee, people don't follow the specifications. We have all these like workarounds for the standardized device that is not actually acting in a standard way. And so with Home Assistant, where we are able to really just spread a net around the whole world of programmers that are all using Home Assistant, they realize things don't work exactly the way it should be, and they're all fixing this. So when I said that we were the second most active open source project in the world, that meant that 17,000 people have contributed to Home Assistant in just the last year.
That's a lot of volunteers.
A lot of volunteers, yes. And if you compare this to a commercial party like Google, right? They need to make money to pay engineers to work and fix all the bugs that they have or to fix all the issues. And so what in a lot of commercial products is that they cannot support everything. They cannot support especially the newer things, the current things, that all the hype, they work. But the older stuff, they don't work. But if you look at your house, a house works in a different upgrade cycle than you have with your phone or your laptop, right? Like we buy a new phone, or they want us to buy a new phone every year, every 2 years. Laptop upgrade cycles, maybe every 5 years. But you put a light bulb in your house, you put a washing machine in your house, or anything, you expect it to last for 10 years, 20 years, right? It's so often you see a thermostat, you go into an old house, it's fully discolored because it has been sitting there working for 30, 40 years, and maybe the only thing you really replace is like the batteries from time to time, but those are standardized, and even that keeps working. And so, yeah, where Home Assistant really shines is that we take all those old products, and if there's even some smartness, even if it's like an older way of wiring, then sometimes you can connect small devices to it to make it smart. And so we integrate all that into a single place for control.
Yeah, that's huge. Are there a lot of orphaned projects that Home Assistant has adopted and brought into the fray because the manufacturers abandoned their support?
So I think there are some companies that they went bankrupt. If users can repurpose the devices or they have local connections, then that is possible. But often we see with IoT devices is that companies they lock things down because they see it as a way to generate revenue, even though it's the complete weird approach because a user pays for a device. It's their data, it's their device that they want to use, and somehow that's them being held hostage in the cloud, like we most recently saw it with MyQ, that they've been actively working on kicking out Home Assistant, and at some point, like last 2 weeks ago, we had to give up, really. But they've gotten a lot of shit from around the world because everybody's like, people just want to control their own garage doors, right? Don't prevent them from doing that. Instead, MyQ wants to charge you money, show you ads.
If they haven't seen that news article, MyQ was a company that garage door openers, like internet-connected garage door openers, and they couldn't find a viable business model, and so they were going out of business, and thus now a whole bunch of people are left with a device that they bought expecting one type of service, one type of function, and then that's going away only a couple of years after they bought it. So let's go back to the open source side of things. These volunteers, they're volunteering their time because they get something in return.
Yes.
And like, how does that work with a business? Is that you're benefiting from all these people volunteering their time. You're not paying them anything. Right. Like there's almost like an agreement or like an unsaid agreement where it's just like, you know what, we're going to respect each other, that we're going to maintain these core services so that everything stays stable. And then like you all now have a playground, but you can suggest things for the core services, but we're probably not going to take all of your considerations and integrate them in. And so how does that dynamic work? Like you founded a for-profit company, like Nabu Casa is a for-profit company that you started to help this project keep going. And does it pay your bills?
It does pay my bill, yes. It actually pays the bill of 30 people.
Oh,
yes. No, so let me just give some background. So 5 years into Home Assistant, which is 5 years ago, because we're 10 years old, it really wasn't possible anymore to organize and run the company as like a side business. I used to do it before my day job at another company. After I came home from work, the weekends was just all working, going through contributions, working with people, doing like hotfix releases if things were broken, handle security issues that were reported. Like running a project takes a lot of time. And so we were really into running the limitations of us as humans, of how much we could do like next to our job, and really had to become a full-time job. But you can't just take an open source project and say, now you have to pay to use it and also expect people to work on it. This goes against the whole spirit. So instead, what we did is to raise money to make it sustainable, is that the company I created, Nabu Casa, we launched a service that sits on top of Home Assistant. So Home Assistant itself is free. Anyone can install it still today. There is no restrictions at all. Anything that you can do local, it's free because it's local. This means that anyone that was working on Home Assistant before Nabu Casa started still has that same experience of working and using Home Assistant for free. Now, there are things that Home Assistant that you can do in Home Assistant, like, well, for real, of course, everything is possible in Home Assistant, but it requires a certain level of technical proficiency. And for example, Home Assistant runs fully local. It means that when you're not at home, you cannot access your Home Assistant installation. Now, one of the first things that we launched was, okay, we're going to implement an end-to-end encrypted remote connection. So people can pay Nabu Casa a monthly or annual subscription. Currently in the US, it runs at $65 a year. And for that money, you will be able to access Home Assistant while you're away from home. It's end-to-end encrypted, so Nabu Casa cannot see any of your data. This is in line with like our values of privacy. And this is great. Now you can use Home Assistant anywhere. It also works with your apps, so you can get presence detection. And of course, if you don't want to pay, and like the people that work on Home Assistant, they have the skills, they can just set it up themselves, and they don't have to pay Nabu Casa. But a lot of people still do, because the money that we raise with Nabu Casa, the people that we hire, it all goes back, and they're all working on Home Assistant, right? So this is not, oh, now I'm sitting on the beach and I'm just like benefiting from all these people. No, now we have people to actually run and organize the project. And Home Assistant is not just, to the world, we're just one project, but actually we are like 15 projects. So we have an operating system, we have the core home automation engine, we have an Android app, we have an iOS app, we have an app for Mac, we have a Matter server, we have a Z-Wave server, a Zigbee server, which is like smart home standards that we integrate. We're doing our own voice assistant this year, which is also people that we employ.
Excited for that.
And so there's all these different things, and we're all running this together with the community. So often what we have is that we have a single person, for example, responsible for voice, like Mike Hansen. He's our voice guy, and he just runs the whole voice arm of our community. And then we have, for example, Marcel. He runs the Matter arm of our community. And this is how we have all these people really like just doing the chores of running a big project.
Yeah, project managers.
Yeah.
And do you have investors? Like,
no.
How did you?
No investors, fully bootstrapped. And that actually has been very important for us, because if you have investors, they want return on investment. And that just really ruins everything. Like we saw it recently with Reddit, which killed all third-party applications. And each time when you see a CEO doing this like move where you're like, this is very offensive to users, it's really because they're often pushed by investors because they have to show growth year over year. And investors don't really care if you do like slow growth. They want either fast growth or die. Like they don't care about this. There's no, a 2x return on investment is not good for them. They want 10x or 100x. So we, with Nabu Casa, with Home Assistant, there's no investors involved. We grow as we wish, and we make sure that everything we do is for our users. Because in the end, if we make a good product for users, that's where the money is coming from that is funding development, right? There's not like an investor funding development because in 5 years they're gonna make it all awful.
And you make hardware as well?
Yes. We started making hardware. It was not something I wanted to do, to be honest. Like hardware is a hard business because it's a single purchase, there's ongoing maintenance. But we realized that if you wanted to use Home Assistant before we made a hardware box that has Home Assistant plug and play on it, you had to get a Raspberry Pi. And I had to tell people, buy a Raspberry Pi, get an SD card, download an image, and flash the image on the SD card. And people don't even know these words. They're like, Raspberry what? They have no idea, right? And basically, we were making Home Assistant easier and easier and easier, but that first step was still very difficult. That's what we were like, okay, we need to make hardware to solve this such that people can get a box, the Home Assistant green, Home Assistant yellow. We have 2 variants depending on your skill level. You install them at home, you plug it in, it just works, right? This is done. Like you have Home Assistant up and running, and then you can start automating your house. You don't have to learn about system administration and stuff like that.
Oh, I love that model because you're very user-focused in all the work. And running an open source project as a for-profit business, as long as those values, the foundational values you have, they're all aligned at the beginning, I think that's how you get what you have now, which is a massive, massive project. So if somebody like myself, was interested in starting a similar type of project or company, like did you just know a bunch of people that had these skills to start a viable open source business? Or like, how did you get over that hump of being like, hey, is this a crazy idea or is this something that actually works?
I think that I've met a lot of very experienced people along the way that are, of course, because they're using Home Assistant, right? And so I've been like getting advice from people and I'm talking to people, but I think a lot of when I started Nabu Casa 5 years into Home Assistant, we actually already had the momentum and product market fit, right? If you want to start a company, then basically I didn't expect it to grow this fast, to be honest, right? Like the fact that the way the growth is, and it's great, but I had not expected it to go this fast, but it is going this fast, and we just go with the flow. Hardware, I've hired someone with some hardware experience. We've talked to Chinese manufacturers that are like, for example, Seed is a company that like helps us.
I know
with,
Seed.
Yeah.
Seed Studio, yep.
Yeah, so they helped us with the Home Assistant Green, and so we are doing the design and the requirements. They do the PCB and the engineering on that side. They help with the manufacturing, and then boom, there's a product, right? And the product follows. We are doing the software updates and all that part, but like they did the engineering work, which we couldn't have done.
Yeah, and they're also in that kind of hybrid space of open source. They embrace open source really thoroughly, and they have a for-profit business.
Yeah.
Awesome. When it comes to wrangling this massive amount of people that are managing this all, is it like you just had to set up a hierarchy of managers in particular verticals to take care of it, and then that takes care of all this complexity and all these pull requests all the time?
More or less. I mean, there's things that we're like, we kind of have to help each other, but we also, from different departments and stuff, but we also, for example, see companies getting involved. So now with Matter, which is a new smart home standard, our Matter implementation has the most debug logging and the most, basically, it's the easiest to look under the hood what's happening with our implementation. And
most
so
transparent.
What do we see? Yes. What do we see is that a lot of manufacturers of Matter devices are now testing against Home Assistant. They're developing against Home Assistant because it's the easiest way to get an interface for the device they're building and making sure it works with Matter, which as a result is that we are getting support for things as soon as they are landing, because
That's so cool.
there's just this, they are building a lock or a thermostat and they want to make sure it works with Matter. And so, Home Assistant is their test bed.
That's so cool that you've gotten so good at providing that type of available tool set for people to prototype that you have manufacturers that are choosing to use Home Assistant instead of their own tools. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Talking smart home, we'll get to Matter in just a second here. It really has exploded in the last couple of years. Chip inside everything, like you said. Smart thermostats are everywhere. But we're still in this dirty period in the smart home market where there's a lot of stuff that shouldn't exist, shouldn't be smart, or things that are becoming obsolete faster than anybody expected them to become obsolete. And then just a lot of experimentation of trying to figure out what is the perfect user interface for the user in the smart home. Like when I was with Haven IAQ, we often had a lot of conversations about, why can't we show this IAQ, this indoor air quality data, to the user via a wall-mounted screen or something like that on the wall? And so is there ever going to be the one hub that's going to rule the smart home market? Is it going to get there?
I don't know. I think it is like you're saying, it's a mess, and I think it will always be a mess. I think that if you are a startup and you really want to get quick to market, then if you want to innovate, standards are going to be in your way, right? Because the moment something is standardized, there's no innovation because it's literally standard, right? You're going to see companies that want to do cool stuff. They are going to do their own thing anyway, and people are still want to buy the hip, fancy, new kind of crazy thing that might not work with anything else. Like we just saw this week or last week that Humane Pin got announced, like that AI kind of Star Trek badge that sits on your clothes. It's a complete new ecosystem disconnected from your phone. Like that stuff doesn't interact with your phone. And as an example of new startups will just do their own isolated stuff. And often they will fail because they don't work with other things. And is a smart home, is there ever going to be a single hub? I don't know. I think that the way Matter is set up, for example, is very interesting because Matter has built-in support that every device can be linked to 5 smart home hubs. And the reason for this is that they realized it should be easy to swap and try out new smart home hubs because all the big tech is involved, right? Google, Apple, and Amazon. And they, especially Google and Apple, they just believe that we make the best technology and users will come our way anyway. Which in certain parts are probably true, and that defaults also often win. So it's a default app on your Android or iPhone, then you're maybe probably going to start with this product. And it's okay. I think in the future we will just have more specialized, smart home hubs. So maybe you will have one smart home hub that's really good in energy management and historical data. And maybe you will have one smart home hub that's really good in voice. So maybe you'll have Apple Home and Siri for voice, but you would have Home Assistant for energy management, for example. Or maybe, everything goes to shit and it's you're going to have 5 different things because otherwise nothing really works together. It's hard. It's really hard to predict.
Yeah.
Also, again, because Apple Home, for example, doesn't work on Android, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a full iPhone house, you could consider Apple, but it's a premium, it's expensive. So most households will not end up with Apple Home. They will end up with Amazon or with Google, maybe Samsung. Yeah, that's just, it's going to be all over the place.
And that's the nature of innovation, as you said, is that innovation is at the opposite end as standardization. And both need to exist really for a market to progress.
Yeah.
But on the topic of standardization, Matter and Thread, I've been watching them for years, trying to see where they were going now. It looks like it's a reality. And it's a... Yeah. So just explain, you're much closer to this than I am.
Yes.
So how did, a very brief history of Matter and Thread, and then what is it, and then why is it revolutionary?
So I think we have to go back 6-7 years when Amazon entered the market of the smart home. So with the Amazon Echo, when the big technology companies were entering the smart home market, they didn't actually arrive as, I want to be the smart home platform of your house and they want to be the brains of your house. They actually entered saying voice control is going to be the thing. Back then it was voice is going to be the next computing platform. Everybody's going to talk to their house. And so Amazon Echo came, Google Assistant, Siri. People don't remember when Apple Home wasn't initial part of, there wasn't a thing. When Apple started controlling smart home devices, it used to only have a voice interface, no app. Like that came later, like a year or two later or something.
I remember that.
But they came into the market and they entered the market as they always do. We are the central player. We have an API. You integrate, you implement our API, and you send all the data to our cloud. So you wanted to be working with Google. You had to, as a light manufacturer, you had to implement Google's API, send every state change to Google. Same with Amazon, same with Apple. And what started happening is that you got this whole fracture. Like some things did not work with Amazon, some things did not work with Google or Apple, and it was just a mess. And what happened is that Apple and Google and Amazon got together and they were like, we cannot innovate. Like they basically, as a smart home platform, you're not on the device level, you sit on a level top. So you need as much inputs into your smart home platform. You need as much control to your smart home platform to really innovate and build cool stuff on top. So they realized that we need to no longer compete on the connectivity level of who can control the most types of light bulbs. We should just all be able to standardize this and actually control light bulbs. And this is what became Matter. So Matter is a smart home standard. It's not the first smart home standard to be invented. However, it is the first smart home standard that's open, that also works over both Wi-Fi as over a radio mesh network, which is Thread. And it's interesting because it's also the first smart home standard that is implemented by all the big technology companies. And it's the first smart home standard where all the big technology companies are together working on a reference implementation. And so for the people that are not, that like a reference implementation it's open source. So basically they are building an open source implementation of Matter such that Apple, Google, and Amazon are all using the same Matter core, or more or less the same. They have some small variations in their systems, which means that interoperability is going to be super important, and it will just work because, like I said in the beginning, just because it's a standard doesn't mean it's actually following the standard. But if we all run the same software that implements the standard, the odds of it all working together is way, way higher. And so Matter is probably going to be a success, but like we're only 2 years in and there's still ways that it can be ruined, of course, in many different ways, lockdown and these kind of things. And we also see that manufacturers are not always big fans of it, because the moment something is standardized, then you don't probably know the vendor of your light switch. You don't know the vendor of your electricity socket that you plug into your appliance in, because why would you? It's just a standard, it's just doing this job and you don't care. But previously, you would open a Philips Hue app and it allowed Philips Hue to upsell you the newest lights. Now you're going to open the Google, Apple, or Amazon app and they can upsell you their newest features and their newest product. There is some friction between smart home platforms, which includes Home Assistant, of course, and the product manufacturers. And so the product manufacturers are trying to put things not inside Matter, or we're talking about MyQ ruining their product. If it was using Matter, they couldn't have done that because it was all using local API Matter towards like Home Assistant, for example.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a trade-off because you have your large players who they are very incentivized to have everything interoperable, and they're the gorillas in the room. Yeah. So they force this on the market and they can market that it's a win for consumers. But nobody talks about how now they have ultimate leverage over all the B and the C players in the market, and that ends up being a stifling of innovation.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting because if we look at like TVs, right? TVs have gone through a similar process, I feel. If you look at Android TV, the software is free. Anyone can install Android TV on the and basically you see the price of TVs have plummeted, right? So it's really gonna be like a benefit for us users, because the price of a light bulb, the price of anything that you want to, it's just going to be the price of production and shipping. There's almost no margin overhead because there's also no ongoing cost overhead anymore, right? Standards for us is really got to be with it. Like we're going to win as users.
Yeah. And somebody else who might win the like professional HVAC side. So that's really where a lot of my niche, my listeners' niche would be. And so whether it's a thermostat or let's say even a HVAC system like a heat pump, if your heat pump was Matter and Thread compatible, that would mean that like you just scan a QR code, it auto provisions it. And then if you're an HVAC company and you have your own kind of custom software app for being able to, let's say, manage a homeowner's the quality of their air or something like that, you could connect all the devices in their house, like their IAQ sensors, their air purifiers, their HVAC equipment, the thermostat. It could all end up actually theoretically connecting to this HVAC service company's service to be able to provide that additional level of value on top of what they get from those devices. Like I see that as being that could create such a new revenue stream for a lot of these businesses that they don't have enough touch points with their users, and their users, they really don't have that many great options for being able to understand what's happening with their HVAC system. Because like the thermostat, it tells you some things like Nests and Ecobees, they are definitely way more intelligent than they were a couple of years ago, but they still don't have the entire picture. So that's really where I see where Matter and Thread could have a big impact on the HVAC market, is the fact that now you can integrate all these other peripherals into a system without having to be an expert with sensors as an HVAC company to get this data back. That seems huge.
No, I agree. I think, I agree. I think that this is where standardization is always, the moment something is standardized, you can start building on top, right? And it's going to be, the moment something is standardized, like you might also all of a sudden don't have to buy everything from a single vendor anymore, right? You can get your air purifiers from a vendor that has better looks or better fits the customer's installation type or walls or whatever it is, right? So choice is an important part of this as well.
But there's one choice that you have made when creating Home Assistant, which is, as you spoke about it, localized control. And so why is localized control, or even just localized data, everything staying in the house and not going up to a cloud? Why is that so important as a feature?
So it's interesting. The reason I did it initially was because there was no cloud, right? I was just writing a script at home. So everything had to be local. But later it became, this is your first, like anything that runs in the cloud generally has a cost per usage. Not you want to run a query against your database, you pay per query. And these costs are very low, right? Maybe $1 for 1 million queries, but it starts adding up, right? So you cannot just host something for free for everyone in the world. Like Google is doing it and Amazon is doing it, but there's ad revenue to be gained at some point, some time of you being in their ecosystem. With Home Assistant, I started out as everything local, but later this kind of grew into, okay, now it's local. It means that nobody knows about your data, which is great. Privacy is built in. Like you cannot build a system where that you put your data at another's place, and if they know about the data, like it's not private, right? Google can have a look at your data, and Amazon can have a look at your data. So the other thing is about obsolescence, right? I mentioned earlier, like thermostats that keep working 20, 30 years from now, they are working now because they work local. Is Ecobee going to be around in 20 years? I don't know. Maybe they get bought. Maybe they don't want to service or support their older thermostat models anymore. Nest is probably going to be around. It's Google, but Google tends to also sometimes kill products. Is that like how much, like it costs maybe, let's say, 50 cents, 80 cents for Google to run your Nest thermostat each year. After how many years are they saying this is enough, right? You need to have these kind of costs built into the product, of the price of a product when you buy it. But of course, in the beginning, Nest was a startup. They were just throwing around this was not built into the price of the product, right? Like it was just like they wanted to have like people to buy it. So it had to be cheap. And so it's like a pyramid scheme in a way. And Google is not going bankrupt. Ecobee, I don't know, right? And it's local is really just like an escape hatch saying this stuff will keep working and it will work forever. Like you put a Home Assistant installation in your house today, you walk away, you don't even update it, you disconnect it from the internet, it will keep working. You don't need any internet and the Home Assistant just does its thing.
That also is actually one of the reasons why I scheduled this with you, this podcast, is because there was a smart device called the Sensi Predict that was made by a company named Emerson. It had a whole bunch of sensors that would connect to your HVAC system, very feature rich, but they ended up not, I guess, figuring out the business model properly. And so in a month from now, they're going to be turning off the cloud, and then all these thousands of devices that these HVAC contractors relied on are going to disappear. And so this whole like I've been interested in using it, Home Assistant for a very long time, but I've now seen this happen too many times where there's an IoT platform that other people relied on that just disappears. And so exploring this open source approach and seeing if there's a viable business that can be built on it, it's just very interesting to me. And I think that it could end up bridging some of the gaps that I've seen in the market in the world of residential HVAC. So let's switch over a little bit more into talking about residential HVAC here. Have you seen any really cool Home Assistant projects done by users related to controlling their HVAC system or controlling their air or sensing their air, or doing something that's a little bit like on the fringe that you thought was really interesting?
One of my colleagues, actually, she has a really cool environment dashboard. So she has like her smart home dashboards, and not grouped by room, but she also has certain tabs grouped by category. Environment is one of them, environment and climate. And she has this graph which has temperature on the x-axis and humidity on the y-axis. And then she has drawn like a comfort zone between these humidity ranges and these temperature ranges. I'm comfortable. And then she has each room plotted on that map where she's like, this is humidity, this is the temperature in the living room. And then you can see, oh, they're outside of where I feel comfortable. I need to be, maybe I have to increase humidity, I have to decrease humidity. Or even maybe if you can't control every room, at least you get some insight in, oh, this is not good, this is good.
Yeah, the psychrometric chart, I think, is what she would have implemented there. How it's like a curved lines, right? And there's a little... Yeah. So that's in the world of HVAC, a psychrometric chart is what that's called. And it's used by HVAC professionals all the time to be able to determine if a room is able to operating within the appropriate specs. That's super cool. I did that once. I think that...
So I guess not so fringe after all.
It is fringe for a homeowner, because homeowners don't actually think about psychrometrics. It's like for myself, because I'm in that world, I even found that Grafana actually has a plugin like for doing that natively for psychrometrics.
Oh, cool.
Built in. But if there's an extension that your friend has in Home Assistant, I'm going to go find that and I'm going to load it into my instance as well. But going back to, I guess, just the residential HVAC kind of industry, is that I'm really passionate about trying to explore additional ways that we can see more innovation on related to building science. In the world of residential HVAC, if you're an HVAC contractor, a lot of them do not understand building science. It's a lot more advanced. You need to oftentimes have a lot more instrumentation. You need to have a lot more training, and you need to go a lot slower in the work that you're doing. So most residential HVAC professionals do not practice building science, which I think is a big shame, because if you were to find an HVAC professional in your area, it's unlikely that they understand how to perform any type of building science, or to even commission. If they were to fix your heat pump system or put in a new heat pump, they probably wouldn't even know how to commission it properly, even though that they think they know what they're doing.
Right, yeah.
We're in the state where there's a lot of problems in the world of residential HVAC that have created moldy homes, and a building stock where there's very few regulations on what needs to get done to make sure that the home stays healthy and comfortable. Because a lot of it is that the home is our castle. And so we don't like it when somebody else tells us what to do in our homes. But I would love to see more examples of projects that can really highlight the application of building science into the home. And a lot of times there's a barrier of entry, is that the instrumentation is so expensive, or it's so complex, or let's say the data analysis is something that is far beyond most people to implement. There's a couple of projects like the HomeChem project, which if you haven't checked that out, there's some really interesting findings that they've had out of there that's shifting the way that we think about building science. Like, we didn't even know that after a forest fire happens and the smoke gets into the home, the actual smoke gets absorbed by the walls and then off gases for months afterwards. Which, like, until you do applied science projects like that, you just have a whole bunch of these hypotheses or assumptions that are unfounded without the data. Really what I'm getting around to is trying to explore using Home Assistant for building science purposes. Is that something that you have members of your community that are really heavily involved in that?
Yeah, there's one university, Northeastern University. They actually did a talk at our State of the Open Home 2 years ago about their work but they are doing research. They have a grant, I think, from the DOE, and they're really focusing on how much comfort levels and temperature changes, like how that impacts your comfort level. So the reasoning behind the research or the driver is that if the grid needs more electricity, there are people that have signed up with their electricity provider that they can remotely turn their AC a little bit warmer if it's hot, or a little bit colder if it's like cold. So just to use less energy on your HVAC equipment. And what happened in Texas at some point is that the electricity provider increased the target temperature. Well, it was very warm outside, and everybody had their AC blaring. They made it too warm. And so everybody woke up sweating, and they were annoyed, and they put it even colder. So it had the opposite effect of what they wanted to achieve. And so what they are doing, this group at this university, is that they are investigating using Home Assistant. So they have Home Assistant deployments at different homes. And whenever people open the windows or when they change the thermostat, they're asking why. And they call them micro surveys. They send a small push notification. People answer 2-3 questions, and then they go back to their day. And this is how they're learning to see what is the amount of temperature, for example, that we could decrease that people will not complain, but still we save the most energy.
Interesting. I will have to follow that project and maybe even get connected with those folks that did that presentation. I'm sure it's probably somewhere available online.
Yeah, it should be on YouTube as well, yeah.
Cool.
The State of the Open Home.
State of the Open Home. I'll go check that out. Related to that is people using it for academic purposes. That makes sense. Now, using Home Assistant for other for-profit or other business purposes. I have seen a few projects of, let's say, companies who are deploying Home Assistant for customers, oftentimes at small scale though, but using something like the Home Assistant Green and maybe like Balena Etcher, or not Etcher, but Balena kind of service for being able to deploy kind of this whole fleet and remotely manage their firmware updates and stuff. So what's your view, what's your opinion of other companies building commercial offerings on top of Home Assistant?
So I think it's great. Like the goal of Home Assistant, right? If you look at our bigger values, it's like privacy, choice, and sustainability. And so the more deployments of Home Assistant are there, it means that more devices need to work with standards and work with around these values. And we with Nabu Casa, we are very focused on just direct consumer, right? So we want to help consumers directly. We are not interested in going into the HVAC market or the farm assistant market or these kind of adjacent markets that we could. People would always tell me, oh, you'll be doing office automation because there's a lot more money there, right? And there's a lot more savings to be gained as well because you're heating or cooling a whole office. But we don't have investors. We don't have to chase the most profitable. We are doing the thing that is the most fun, which is just working with actual consumers and other companies using our platform. It's open source. So if they make improvements, they can either try to get those improvements back into Home Assistants to lower their future maintenance burden, which means they are also improving it for us again, right? Or they are not bringing it back into Home Assistant and they're going to increase their maintenance burden to at some point they're probably just going to fork it. And that's okay. Let them use Home Assistant. If they can do a better job at making HVAC or farms run better, please do so. Because we do a lot of cool things in Home Assistant, but it's not rocket science magical. It's just that, we've just been playing and toying with this code base for 10 years, so it's pretty mature.
That's so cool. And would you ever license a version of the distribution or of kind of the tool set that you've made with commercial support? So to say, hey, Farm Assistant or HVAC Assistant, you can pay us and we'll help maintain, we'll actually take this forked version, or maybe we'll at least provide you with commercial support, which is here's a phone line to call, here's a support email address, here's your account manager. Is that something that you guys are going to offer?
Yep. No, that's not right now on our roadmap because we really just want to focus on consumers. Awesome. And I'm afraid that having to support companies, even customized forks, it's too difficult. It will split our attention and it will not be in the benefit of our users.
You're a wise man. I've been a part of too many startups that have just thought that it would be simple enough to solve all problems at once, and it's not.
Yeah, it's not. No.
All right, a couple last things here for you, which is when doing my research for Home Assistant, I came across this project called VOLTTRON, VOLTTRON, which was born out of the DOE and I think around almost the same time, like 2012-ish. And the goal was, it's basically like a data assimilation project that's able to pull in data from all these different sensors. It sounds similar to Home Assistant, except a lot more kind of complex because it was very focused on cybersecurity. But I did see that there was a repository of software online that had an integration between Home Assistant and VOLTTRON, but it's 6 years out of date. So was there ever any kind of like interaction or integration between the two?
No, so I've seen their website but I've never used the product or worked directly with them. We see people building connectors between Home Assistant and other platforms all the time because your data is local. You can do with it what you want, and so people do. I think that projects that are born within like government agencies focused towards users generally don't have a high chance of success, just because, in my opinion, of course. But I think that the fast iteration, you need to be solving things for users and solving them on their grounds and not like the rules you have set within the government. You need to build something that will, for example, in the beginning of the years, you need to focus on a small group, but governments cannot really do that. They always have to build for everyone in society at once, instead of focusing on a small group and then going bigger. For example, as a smaller project that needs to gain adoption, it's very difficult to include everyone and then build high quality. It just costs a lot of resources.
That makes sense.
I think, I don't think they have that.
Yeah, no, and it's not, I don't think it's just your opinion. I think a lot of the data shows that those types of projects don't end up creating that type of impact in the world as much as Home Assistant has.
Well, and I think that this is where actually a Home Assistant is a nice middle ground. Saying that we are not a for-profit, like Nabu Casa is a for-profit company, but the Home Assistant project is just open source and anyone can use it. And we see scientists using it. And if HVAC people are going to use this because it provides a solid foundation for them to do like building science, this is great, right? Because maybe some of this building science can get back into Home Assistant. And we actually this is the spirit of open source, which is in a way a programming equivalent of academia, right? In academia, we're all building on top of each other's research. In programming and open source, we build on top of each other's code, and anyone can in the end use and benefit from it. And that's just, we all get the best stuff. That's awesome.
And that's how the internet happens.
Yeah, no, of course. We build on top and we reuse and repurpose, and it's awesome.
That's amazing. I think that opens up a couple of ideas of things that I want to do with Home Assistant. Maybe try to convince some of my building science folks to start playing around with it and then see what we can do with it. So let's wrap things up here. If somebody wanted to learn more about Nabu Casa or Home Assistant or get started, is it like YouTube channel or they have to go on Discord, or is there like a really simple way for them to get started?
The easiest way to get started today is just to buy a Home Assistant Green. You can go to home-assistant.io. It's the website of Home Assistant. You'll see the Home Assistant Green. It is a box, $99. It runs Home Assistant. You install it, boom, you're ready to go. If you want things like Zigbee, Z-Wave, smart home protocols, you can plug in USB sticks to give it that functionality. But to get started, you really don't need it. And if you want to do building science, there's a lot of air quality projects and also, or products, I have to say, that integrate with Home Assistant to get all the data going. Home Assistant has already built-in tools for showing graphs, statistics, dashboards, all these stuff, automation. So you can really do a lot of stuff just by starting with the Home Assistant Green and go from there.
Awesome. Paulus, thank you so much for your time today. And I just really thank you for your contribution to the community here.
Awesome. No problem. You're welcome.